Oh, that's very nice. Oh, nice. All right, I'm going to talk to you about Q methodology. I'm going to focus in a bit on education assessment, where I see assessment as a pretty broad window. So we'll get started. So Mike gave a little bit about me, but so I have a bachelor's degree in physics and astronomy. That's the degree, as well as a degree in math, master's degree in physics. Then I went and worked in industry for 7 years. People used to always say, "You're getting your degree in physics. Like, what are you going to do? Teach?" And I was like, "Oh, heck no, I'm going to be an industrial physicist." Then I was. I made radiation detectors. 7 years, seven bosses, four names, three owners, two different buildings, two different locations, and three different offices. I learned a lot. Um, and people kept leaving, and I kept getting their jobs. So I grew crystals, tested crystals, gave technical support for production, traveled with salespeople, and did technical support for sales. It was a little bit of everything. And then there was an ad in our local newspaper for a tenure track position at the University of Akron in what was their community and technical college, teaching physics and some other courses for engineering technology majors. The short answer, it's like applied engineering. It's the engineering that existed before Sputnik in 1957. So that first summer, after I spent, 2 semesters just trying to be a week ahead of all my students, I decided that I had had some pretty horrible physics education experiences. So I decided that I should take some education classes. And one of my colleagues was like, "Well, if you're going to take classes, then you might as well make it worth something." So that seemed like a good idea. And so I got my PhD in science education in 2003. My dissertation had absolutely nothing to do with Q. It was highly quantitative with some observations to make the qualitative people on my committee happy. Not that they were really happy. They spent a lot of time fighting. But in 2004, I was at the Eastern Educational Research Association meeting, ran into one of my grad student peers who actually never finished, but he had just stumbled upon Q methodology, took a class with Steve Brown, who is like the living demigod of Q methodology, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I thought of you because all of the things you ever said about why student evaluation of teaching doesn't make any sense. Q methodology addresses all of your complaints." And I was like, "All right, I'm in. What should I read?" He said, "Get the McCune and Thomas 1988 Little Green Book from Sage." So I got it. I read it many times because it didn't sink in at first. And I've been doing Q research since 2004. I've gone to the Q international conferences since then. I missed one in that time. But in the meantime, while I was doing all this and having kids, working full time and having and getting my PhD, I was a professor of general technology physics. So I ran the physics in what was the community technical college. We had also had multiple names. See, there's a reoccurring theme. Then they did a big reorg. They laid me off. The union took me and one other person to arbitration. They had to hire me back. The physics department said they didn't want me, and the head of mechanical engineering said, "We'll take her." And that's where I've been ever since. So, and my background is just really weird mixture of physics. Now I teach in mechanical engineering technology. I'm in my 31st year, and I'm still got a new prep. So it just never ends. I'm a fellow in our Institute for Lifespan Development and Gerontology because I've worked with, as I always call her, my groovy sister-in-law, who does caregiving for aging adults. That's her niche. And so we've done some Q studies together. So how program assessment is usually done, right? We have qualitative studies, so we might do things like interviews and focus groups. We report findings in aggregate, right? So maybe we do a theme analysis, we use in vivo and come up with all the themes, but it's still an aggregate. And if we use surveys with Likert scale survey scales, then, right, seems really simple. I once had a grad student who said that, quote, well, that's okay. I'll just do a survey for my dissertation. And I was like, have you taken a class on how to make a survey? He's like, what? You mean you can't just make a survey? Like, no, you can't just make a survey. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong with Likert scale survey. So there's floor effects and ceiling effects, bias, right? Again, we report things in aggregate. So this is just like a little screen grab of, right, how you felt about your hotel stay, because everybody has at one time or another, probably multiple times, you went to Target and they send you, right, a survey about your experience. And it's a whole bunch of Likert scales, and maybe at the very end they're like, do you have any other comments? And, but does it really show you anything, right? Or as I used to say before I learned about Q, what is a 4? How is a 4 different than a 5? Or when I was on our faculty research committee where we would review proposals for summer fellowships, you know, we'd have arguments because the engineers argued that nothing is a 5 because that would be perfect, and nothing is perfect. But the social science people were like, she's my friend. I like her research. I'll give her a 5. And then they argue that the engineer's perspective was, but there should be no 5s because nobody's perfect. And the social science and some of the other people were doing things like 1s for the ones they didn't like and 5s for the ones they did. So when they took the average, it was really skewed, right? It's also, right, we can have distributions like this. So this is not quite the scale or the result of a chair review committee that we had back when I've had many department chairs, but 3 good ones. We did a review of him, and part of that review process was rating him on a scale of 1 to 7. How is Doug as a department chair? And when the person who was chair of the committee presented it, she reported the average, because that's what we always do with Likert scales, right? And it was like 3.5. So look at that. He's right in the middle. That's not bad, right? That's okay. But when you read the qualitative comments, a 3.5 really didn't make sense, because there were glowing comments about how Doug always left you alone. You could do whatever you wanted. Then there were other comments that was like, Doug was a pain because Doug never supported you when, you know, something happened and there was a problem with a student. So I was like, can we plot the responses from our faculty for this Likert scale survey? And it looked just like this. And basically, he got 2s, and he got 6s and 7s. Love him, hate him. There was nothing, like in the 3 to 4 area, right in the middle, no one felt that way about him. There were 2 views, obviously, from this bimodal distribution. And that's just a great example of how we all had the same chair, we should all have the same experience, but we don't. Right? We have different people, we're having different experiences. Some people love Doug because he leaves you alone. Others need support from Doug every once in a while. And he's like, you know, it's Friday, he's not there, he has to mow his grass. So what if you could have the level of description of a qualitative study, but the empirical numerical evidence of a quantitative study, and also differentiate views? So instead of shooting for, right, the middle, like sometimes we say we teach to the middle, what if we could differentiate views and say, there are actually 2 different views, 3 different views, 4 different views about this particular topic, this instructor, this event, right, this experience. So that's what Q offers. So it's more in alignment with what we know about subjectivity, that different people, right, fall into different categories. There's different types. Even if you did a Q study about how Democrats feel about Trump, right, there'd be different views that would emerge, right? Maybe they, right, love him, hate him for different reasons. So everybody has a view about everything, right? Our favorite type of potato chip, right? how we prefer to teach in our classrooms, how we prefer to learn as students, right? We're actually pretty opinionated, and that's what Q does. So it's a mixed method in that it blends qualitative and quantitative at such a level that you can't parse out this is a quantitative part and this is a qualitative part. And so if we look at this figure from Ridenour and Newman's book, oh no, I can remember the name of the book. They also had an article was the topology of research purposes. And so here we start off with one, right? We have theory, we do a lit review, we have hypothesis, right? We collect data, we have analysis. That's really more quantitative. We have conclusions, and then we have more hypotheses. And so we have this cycle where qualitative and quantitative, right, come together in this cycle of research, this continuum. Oh, that's what it is. It's the qualitative, quantitative continuum. This is also the same thing. It's just my version. I wrote this a long time ago in the Q, International Q Journal, Operant Subjectivity, about Q as a mixed method. So this is the continuum from Tasha Corey and Ted Lee's book on mixed methods from 2009. And we see that Q is constantly in the middle. So its purpose is to objectively measure subjectivity. But it has a very subjective purpose, but then everything else, right, we want to explain, but it's also exploratory. We have numerical data, but we also end up with narrative data, right? It's structured, but yet it's open-ended. So our Qs just go down, right, the center so that it's literally in the middle of the qualitative, quantitative continuum. So some examples of program assessment literature in Q. These are just mine. There's others. Yes? What's that? Sure. Yep. I'll send them to Mike and he can distribute them, or you can email me. Yep. Sure. Oh yeah. So the study I'm actually going to talk about is looking at why mechanical engineering students persist in their degree. I had students who were ME, mechanical engineering students, and group of MET students who did this. 50% of our mechanical engineering technology students are transfers from the ME bachelor degree. They moved to MET for a variety of reasons, but I wanted to look at all of those things and why they leave and why they stay in a little deeper way. And then I have some articles written with Mike and Carrie, some others that are exercise student, perceptions of physical activity, and there's one about obesity, like treatment for obesity in exercise science, with one of my former grad students, Laura Richardson. So there's actually quite a bit, and this is not even all of the program assessment stuff even I've just done. So there's this objective, subjective side, and usually, right, if we're scientists, the perception is that we throw out anything that's subjective, we must be objective, right? But there's really subjectivity everywhere. It drives our behavior and our decision making. So thus the focus on subjectivity, and one of the ontological aspects of Q is that we accept that subjectivity is important. It drives decision making and behavior, choices and feelings. So basically we want to not only allow participants to capture their internal viewpoints in these Q sorts, where they sort usually subjective statements, right? And then they're grouped together in types, right? So basically correlation factor analysis. And the results allow us to not only say there are 3 views, but to actually describe those views in depth, right? And then we bring in comments from participants who are on specific factors, and so we can even enrich that description further. And it pretty much, right, takes the benefits of qualitative and the benefits of quantitative and merges them together, thus mixed method. even though Q methodology is this year 90 years old. It was first revealed in a letter to Nature by William Stevenson in 1935. But it was so far beyond its time that it took a long time for it to really start blooming like we see today. So again, right, Q rejects the idea that there's a singular view, so it throws out the whole idea of aggregate. So if we put subjectivity into ChatGPT, right, which we love and hate at the same time, it says subjectivity refers to the way individuals perceive and interpret the world based on their personal experiences, emotions, beliefs, and biases, and that this concept is important in recognizing that different individuals may have varied interpretations of the same situation, leading to diverse viewpoints and opinions. And that's exactly what we're interested in Q, is to study, to scientifically study subjectivity. So this is usually like if it's a workshop, like I used to teach Q workshop graduate level, right? I would show this and say, what do you see, right? And I have clickers and, you know, is it a duck or is it a bunny? It would about half and half usually. So half the class would see the bunny and the other half would see the duck. And then there'd be somebody who always said they saw both and it was a dunny, right? But one of these isn't right and the other one is wrong. They're just different perceptions of the same picture. That's what Q does. We might, right, reveal 3 different viewpoints about academic freedom in American universities and colleges, but it doesn't mean that one of those views is right and 2 of them are wrong, right? There's people's viewpoints and they give us information that's connected to their behavior, and that means that we could design things to address different viewpoints. So if it was something about, right, how people teach or how they feel in the classroom, we could devise professional development that would address, right, how those instructors view emotions in the classroom. So maybe one group is, they're so focused on student learning, so you would market your professional development to that group as, I'm going to show you active learning. These are great ways to, right, help students learn in your classroom. The other view might be, look at me, right? I like students to be engaged with me, eyes on me. I am the sage on the stage. So you could have professional development that could say, hey, you know, if you did group work, you could find a way for individual students to engage with you. And that might captivate them, whereas lecturing, right, they think that's the only way that they can have people look at them and, right, gaze upon their greatness. And then, right, the third view could be they love their discipline. That's what they wanted. So maybe you tell them there are exciting ways where you could get students excited also about your discipline, right? Whatever it was. That's, again, what we do in Q. So we're going to look a little bit at retention, persistence in mechanical engineering and mechanical engineering technology. We know it's a problem. There's been books written about it forever. 1997 book by Seymour and Hewitt talking about leaving. Like, I remember when I read that book, I laughed, I cried, and I was like, oh my God, this is exactly right. I felt exactly like a lot of these students are describing their experiences as the only woman as an undergrad physics major, the only woman in my graduate program. Yeah, it was fun. So theoretical background, right? About half of STEM majors never finish their undergraduate degree in STEM. There's all kinds of reasons why. We usually look at it in aggregate. There's usually questions about, well, you know, they all have financial problems, right? Maybe like students who stay and students who leave have financial problems. So what differentiates these people who stay and these people who leave, right? Or they all experience some pretty bad teaching, Calc 2. What makes some of them persevere and some of them go, screw this, I'm going to be, you know, a psychology major or whatever. that's the questions, right, that can't be addressed if we only look at qualitative and only look at surveys, and we're always shooting towards the middle. We're always looking at it in aggregate instead of differentiating. These students might all be in the same program, but they have very different experiences. So, right, a lot of times we blame academic preparation. These students just aren't ready, right? They don't care. They'd rather be on their phones. They never took calculus in high school, right? We have weed out courses there to get rid of those unprepared students, right? Make them feel bad. They get shamed because they're in the lower circle, because there's an upper circle and a lower circle, you know. Bad teaching, how you deal with bad teaching. Some students just teach themselves, right? I learned to survive my undergraduate physics by having friends in my degree program, and we'd sit around and basically do group work. And then when I went to grad school, that's what I did. I was like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And they were like, what a great idea. So we basically did group work. We didn't know that's what we were doing. It wasn't a thing. We certainly didn't do any group work in our classes in the 80s. Some students are willing to come to your office hours. They're almost always the better students, not the ones who really need that much hand-holding. The ones who really need to go to tutoring feel ashamed because it's like admitting that they're dumb. They have problems financially. They're working full-time, going to school full-time. They may or may not get scholarships. They might worry about maintaining their scholarships. And then there's the culture of programs and departments and institutions. We usually call that belonging these days. I'll tell you what I found out. Students don't know what belonging means. They have no idea. Well, except one factor. They had a lot to say about that. So our purpose, believe it or not, this took place at the University of Akron, a mid-sized urban public university somewhere in the U.S. Midwest. And I used Q, big surprise. And this is just the citation again. So I started off with an IRB approval for an open-ended survey that I, may have given some of my MET students some extra credit to participate. And then my son was still a chemical engineering undergrad then, so he knew a lot of mechanical engineering students who had changed their major or were unhappy, and I was like, can you make your friends do this survey? So we did. And then I also did a survey of the literature, so I ended up with 127 subjective statements about basically ME and engineering programs, the good, the bad, the ugly. So I broke them into structure like we often do for our concourse. So looking towards the future, external influences like family or financial, internal things like their perceived ability and interest and belonging, which I'll put in quotes because they didn't know what that meant. Their experience and preparation, so what their high school experience was like, and then just teaching and learning, their experiences in the classroom and laboratories. Narrowed all that down across those themes, have 48 subjective statements. They were selected using Fisher's design of experiments, which came from agriculture. It is actually a quantitative, way of distributing. They did it for plots of land, so you'd have different plots in different places, and so you'd have these kind of soybeans, and then you'd have these second type of soybeans, and then you grow them in different places in order to eliminate, variability. That's where it came from. Got IRB approval for the next part. Again, I got ME faculty and MET faculty and my son's friends who were in ME to participate. Everything was done online. I used EQ WebSort by Sean Banisic. The condition of instruction was to think about your engineering education experiences, including decisions to keep your major versus change your major, and then sort the statements based upon your personal viewpoint. And I managed to collect 106 Q sorts, which is a lot in the land of Q. So this is what it used to look like when we did them by hand, So we would have a paper grid. I spent a lot of time with a paper cutter and Excel, because I love Excel, making, right, same size statements, cutting them all up, right? And so they would always do the same thing, right? You'd have so many statements. They would start off with like my view pile, unlike my view pile, and neutral, don't really care one way or another, don't understand what this statement is even about. And then they would take the like me pile, right? And they'd find the 3 that are most like me. So maybe this is a 12, because all the statements have numbers. And this one is, right, 40, and this one is 3. And then they'd find the next 3, so it just goes by columns. And it's always most to most. So maybe the next one, right, this one is a 1, and this is a 39. And they just keep filling it in with the like pile, and then they start the other end, and they start with the unlike me pile, and they find the 3 that are the most unlike them, right? And I lost my thing, there it is, right? So maybe this one is 16, and this one is 22, right? And this one's 5, and then, right, they just keep going inward, right, while they put these statements in, and then they finally do the neutral, right? And then you have these numbers, right? Every box gets a number. Every number is used only once. You can tell I did a lot of these face-to-face using paper. But then there was the pandemic, right? So this is another one. This is what all of my instructions would look like. I give them little piles on my paper. I made cutouts. They would be yellow because my physics room floors were white. And if they dropped one, they couldn't see it on the white floors. If they were bright yellow, I could say, hey, you dropped one. So implicit in Q is this idea that all individuals can provide a coherent structure, right, to these items that represents their inherent internal viewpoint. So we're not viewing it externally. They are literally coding these statements into a Q sort to represent how they feel. This is my thing that won't run, so we're gonna cheat and fly over here. Sorry, I think I turned it down. I don't know. So this is just what it would look like online, right? Same exact idea. They're randomly given statements, and they put them into piles. In this case, it's agree, disagree, and no strong feelings or neutral. This is Sean Banaszak's original thing that he used in his classroom about using iPads in his learning English as a second language. He is actually originally from Ohio, but he is now in Japan, and that's what he does. He teaches at a university. And then right now we're just distributing these, and they're color-coded. So these are the like pile, so they don't feel as strongly about these, and right, they're just distributing them, going along. And then after this, right, then they're given post-sort comments. So the software takes those that were at, in this case, right, the most degree pile, right, so those 3, and it asks you, it says, here's the statement you put it +3, please comment on why you put it there. And you hope that they don't write things that are just profound, like, because that's where it belonged, which is where a lot of my students, that's what they write. And then, right, there could be some demographic information. We usually collect demographic information because journals expect us to have it, right? When you're doing a dissertation, they expect you to have some demographic variables. But demographic variables in Q, it ends up, are almost never important, right? So we don't end up with a male factor and a female factor. You don't end up with an ME factor and an MET factor. It never works out that way because people's backgrounds and experiences and how they think about things are their own unique way, right? And right, Sean has them ask questions. He asks them questions about their iPad use. Right? And then it's done, and then you hit submit, and it goes into an online database. So that's basically how it works online. There are some in the land of Q who aren't thrilled about online, Web sorting, I personally love it. Everybody that I've ever twisted their arms and made do face-to-face ones with little strips of paper, and then they've done sorts online, they all tell me the same thing. Please, God, don't ever make me do one by hand ever again. It's so nice to do it online. I can read it. It's easier. I don't drop little pieces of paper. I can see things better. I can zoom in. Right? So the people who participate, the number of people is not the sample size in Q. Instead, the sample size is the number of items in the Q sample. So we usually have a pretty small selection of people, right? In this case, I had 106, which is again considered a lot. Not too surprising. It's mechanical engineering technology. So 77% were male. I did not ask race, mostly because our demographic is white redneck male between the ages of 18 and 25. They like hunting, fishing, trucks, girls, and beer, not necessarily in that order of preference. Right, so maybe 5% of my students are women and 5% are African American. So I didn't ask that because I didn't want to know who anybody was. Most of them were ME majors. They were a combination of, right, freshman classes, senior classes, and then I had some people in between. Just under 23% had said they had changed their major from their original engineering major, and only 12% were transfer students. Used Sean Banaszak's analysis software, CADE, and like I always do, the solution in factor analysis is much more exploratory. So you look at the factors, right, and then you might make multiple solutions, and then you look at what are called the factor scores, which is essentially a Q sort that represents that viewpoint, right? It's an amalgamation of those who were on that factor. And you look to see which solution is most operant. So it resonates with the comments they wrote post-sort, right? You know things when you teach in ME and MET. So I ended up with a solution that had 4 views, and they made sense. And then, of course, I asked them questions, right, post-sort. So I look at, right, this compilation, this theoretical Q-sort for each factor, the comments that those who are on that factor said about their most salient placements. I look at consensus across the views. I look at distinguishing statements for each of the factors, and that's how we do our interpretation, right? So consensus engineering provides a good career. So I ended up having statements about, you picked engineering because it enhanced your future, you'd be financially stable, it's a good career. That was easy peasy. That's why a lot of them went into ME, was because some high school advisor said, you like taking things apart and you seem smart enough, so you should go into engineering. And they didn't necessarily know what that meant. So they were looking towards the future. They loved the idea that you could sign up as co-op programs so that they could make money as they went through their degree program. They were actually pretty neutral about large class sizes and whether or not that affected their learning or their desire to stay, even though we know that they take pretty large classes in things like Principles of Chemistry 1 and Physics 1. And they also agreed that the time commitment being an engineering major was a deterrent, right? Their friends who were other majors were doing a lot more fun things. They were in fraternities or whatever. So this is the composite sort for view 1. I won't go into it in great detail, but we can see that we have my future. I keep losing my thing there. My future, my desire for a good career, co-op opportunities, right? This one, my friends, was a distinguishing statement. They felt smart, right? Right? Advising was bad. How classes are scheduled are bad. Teachers aren't, right? Faculty aren't good teachers. So we'll just kind of summarize what that shows us. So these students said they were smart, they were going to be successful no matter what, but they were really unhappy with their program. They were not having a good experience. Instruction left a lot to be desired. They had they just said physics was really important for their success in ME. So whether that meant high school physics prepared them or physics at the university, right? They're good at math. They believe they're good at math, but they're unhappy about advising the schedule, right? There's morning classes and evening classes, and so they're split. Their perception of whether or not faculty cared about them, going to school and working, and they were worried about paying off their student loans. Factor 2, we see some new things. Again, here's my future, my desire to make money, right? But now, here we have, they really like how the major is designed, including the topics. Faculty expertise is really important for their ability to stay in their ME or MET major. Instructors' level of helpfulness, right? So that's very different than the other one. And then, right, they don't have challenges in their personal life. Having to work, right? They're either not working or they have a flexible work schedule. So for these students, faculty scholarships and co-ops are the key to remaining in their ME or MET major, right? So they appreciate faculty expertise, right? So they have a very different experience with faculty. They're helpful. They like how the major's designed. They got scholarship money, and because they have scholarship money, they don't have to work as much. Takes a big burden off of them. They have co-ops to help them pay for school. Things that were detrimental to them staying, hours working while attending school, challenges in their personal lives, and fear of failure. This is factor 3, right? They're worried about their college expenses and their student loans. Those are at +5, right? So this is a really big deal for them, is the money. So they're really discouraged. They're really excited about their major and what they'll be doing in the future, but they're really worried about how expensive college is for them, the number of student loans that they have to take out, right? The rising cost of tuition, and then they have challenges in their personal life. They don't have challenges in their personal life. Anyway, and then change their major. They're not so secure in their math skills. Their high schools didn't prepare them well for college. They don't feel smart. They worry about their grades. These could be like the D for degree people. And they hate curving grades because these are the students who tend to be not in the upper circle, they're in the lower circle. And some of them actually wrote comments about how faculty who curved made them ashamed and feel stupid because they were below average. And sometimes faculty would say, if you're below average, then, you should rethink your major, right? It's Lake Wobegon, everybody should be above average. And then the fourth factor, they feel really strongly that their ability to be successful is a driving force for them staying in their degree. They have really good math skills. They don't necessarily have, right, any sense of belonging, right? They don't care about faculty research. They don't feel like they belong at the university. And this was a really interesting one because there were 4 people on this factor, but only one of them wrote comments about their post-sort. So I only know about her, right? So she was an African-American ME major in her senior year. She was obviously going to graduate, and boy, did she have a lot to say about how she didn't feel welcome, that even in Women in Engineering and our diversity program didn't make her feel welcome because they didn't tell her she should join the Society for Black Engineers. So she felt very alone and very, very out of the inner circle. But she was determined, and so were these others based on the composite Q sort. So they felt like they had really strong math skills. They were really good at time management. They got things done, but they could care about faculty research. They have problems with family commitments. Sometimes, right, we have students who are caregivers, sometimes to children, sometimes to their parents. They felt a very big lack of belonging in the university and in their engineering program. And they mentioned the program culture. This certain African-American woman commented that the culture was, and I quote, just very, very white. So factor one is in alignment with some prior research about advising, right? And poor advising leading to students leaving their major, as well as poor teaching, poor course design, right? Things like that. But yet these students feel academically prepared. I always think that these are the smart students. It wouldn't matter what people do in their classroom. These guys are going to be okay. Factor two, this was actually the largest number of students who changed their major on factor two. They felt encouraged to remain in their majors by faculty. If they dropped out or changed their major, it would have to do with personal challenges or having to work a lot of hours and having problems with time management. This is also in alignment with findings by Seymour and Hewitt, and Seymour, who has, still talking about leaving. 3 and 4, I kind of lumped them together because it was the women factors. They seem to be on those two factors. Factor 3 was very focused on curving. They had a lot of comments about how curving made them feel unworthy, like they didn't belong in the major. And of course, this is also in Seymour and Hewitt's book and follow up by other research studies by Seymour. These are the ones they feel like they're just stubborn and they're going to stick to their guns no matter how bad it is, right? So they feel like they get a lot of negative messaging from faculty, they get negative messaging from the university, and yet, right, they persevere. And of course, there's been a number of studies, not just Fisher et al., not 2019, that women and people of color often feel like they don't belong in STEM, that they have imposter syndrome. So if we look for a singular reason for students, right, to either persist or leave, right, then we lose these nuances, right? So they're all in the same program, but they have very different experiences, right down to faculty are horrible and they're not supportive and helpful, to factor 2, who said faculty, they're so great and supportive. I'm sure they have pretty much the same faculty. So there's different reasons to stay and go, right, that we would miss if we did something like a survey, like a Likert scale survey. This is my shameless plug for my book coming out in March. It's, you can find it in Routledge. You could find it on Amazon, although Routledge right now is having some kind of pre-order, like you can save like 20% off, so, I don't know. Also, since I mentioned academic freedom at the beginning of my talk, I am looking for participants. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time getting people to do this Q study. I usually, when I'm online and I'm bugging people, I usually have no problem getting participants. So usually when I do an online, right, I get somewhere between 40 and maybe 180, I think is the biggest I ever got. And I've been stuck at like 20 forever. Like I have done everything. I've even gone on to X and sent out a call to participate. Yes?
I was going to ask, where are you, I mean, I didn't hear about this, right?
Oh, right.
Not that I'm special, but
Right.
where are you disseminating?
I disseminated it through like personal connections. Some are in I don't want just academics. I've tried to get some politicians to reply. I asked the head of AUP to participate. So I've tried to recruit a lot of people who've told me that they'd participate, but when I look at the demographics, I don't really think they have. What's that? Um, I don't know. You got one to suggest, a good listserv to?
Well, I mean, depending on your, depending on there, you mentioned engineering, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's like, I mean, various societies have listservs.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have various groups like ecology, evolution,
Mm-hmm.
ecology, evolution. They have listservs. Women groups or other
Oh,
groups have listservs.
all right. I'll try that. That's a great idea because I belong to an assessment listserv. I haven't sent it out to them.
You sent it to Sabre.
No.
So you have Sabre, you have, I mean, now that potentially you may be
Mm-hmm.
not preaching to the choir, but getting a very targeted
Mm-hmm.
group with certain viewpoints.
Right.
But there are, or like the National Association of Biology Teachers or the National
Mm.
Science Teaching Association, they all have newsletters.
Mm-hmm.
And academic freedom is a hot topic right now.
Mm-hmm.
So if
Oh
you,
yeah.
if you send to NABT,
Mm-hmm.
you circulate this in your, I'm doing a study, here's the blurb,
Mm-hmm.
here's the link. Will you be able to post it on your newsletter?
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna try that because and yeah, well, I used to belong to a physics listserv, but it doesn't really exist anymore. I belong to like solo physics research group, but that's not been very active.
Like
Okay.
NABT, there's also the National Center for Science Education, or there's like an evolution
Mm-hmm.
listserv, and for that academic freedom could be a hot
Yeah.
topic nowadays.
Well, and it's funny because I can never, like, I just download from the database and then I analyze to see where I am. And so right now, nobody has taken the bait of it's a statement I don't remember where I got it from, but that, academic freedom is just like make up stuff. Like, it's just made up and it doesn't mean anything. But, so nobody's picked that one as like they believe that statement. But right now I have people who are into academic freedom, and it ends up I have like two factors. So they're both pro academic freedom, they just have a very different focus. And I've been trying to get like politicians, like I've like emailed like Ohio representatives and state representatives trying to get them to participate. And
Fear nowadays about anything that says freedom in it.
right.
They may not participate because of the fear factor.
That's what I'm thinking. And it's funny because to me, it's like the perfect time. Like I got it sent to, it's a Facebook group for Miami University of Ohio, who are currently in contract negotiations. Things aren't going well. And they approved it to be a post on their Facebook page, but I have gotten nothing. So I don't know if it's just because people are afraid. I've started saying, it's anonymous. I have absolutely no way of associating you with your Q sort, And even if you wrote comments that helped me know who you were, like, I'm not going to reveal those, Like for the engineering retention survey, certain professors' names got thrown in, and I was like, oh, and thank you. We'll make sure that nobody gets to know how much you all hate him. Yes.
I was wondering when you're generating your initial set of statements,
Mm-hmm.
like how you know when you have enough or how you pick a certain number. Is it driven by theory? I know you said you do a lot of literature reviews.
Mm-hmm.
How do you generate that initial set? And I'm guessing you should also run book, but I'm also curious like how you refine that set when you go out and start like field testing it.
Right. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so the idea is it's so different than making like a Likert scale survey, right? Where you have content and they fall into groups, but you have like some statements that kind of like help so you can see the reliability and things like that. So the key is that you want to collect the concourse to have as many types of communications as possible. And then that's the themes, and then the structure, so you grab things from different themes. Sometimes I end up combining a statement, or I have statements that are similar. I personally like to use statements that are in the language of the participants, so that they feel more organic. They don't have, and even in Q, like I'll read papers, I review a lot of articles that are Q, and people will have, like, they'll use expert validity tests and things like that, but that doesn't really matter, because one of the, I'll call it weird, things about Q is, right, so we have this structure, this Q sample across, so we have, 8 statements across 5 themes or something, right? And so it's all structured. And then we give it to participants, and our original structure doesn't mean anything. It's only meant to make sure that our sample, Q sample, is representative of the types of communications. And then the people who sort it give it their own structure. So Stevenson always said that Q sample items have no meaning until the participant interacts with them. They give the statements meaning. So it's that Schrodinger's cat kind of thing, right? So when it's in the box, is it dead or alive? It doesn't matter. It depends on when that participant reads that statement and how they interpret it, which is one of the reasons why you need, like, post-sort interviews or post-sort questions, because not everybody's going to interpret a statement the same way. But so you can even have ambiguous statements. But yeah, the key is communications. In fact, Stevenson wrote a lot of, he wrote a really key text, which I'm not going to remember the name of because my brain hurts. He had the study of behavior, and then the play theory of mass communications from 1967. And because he was on the same kind of crooked path as Carrie and I, started off a physicist, then got his PhD in psychology, worked with Spearman, did his dissertation with Spearman, the founder of factor analysis, and Cyril Burt, who later got, disgraced, but that's a whole different story. But, and then ended up working during World War II, doing some research and writing manuals, and then came back, was in the London School of Psychology, was the associate director. He was supposed to be the director. He didn't get the director, so then he went to the University of Chicago, where they ended up not giving him tenure. So then he left there, and then he worked in marketing research in New York City. And then he got a distinguished professorship at the University of Missouri at Columbia in their journalism school. Yeah, talk about a long, crooked path. But, and that's why I always feel like I just feel like I get this guy. Like, nobody wants to listen to you. You have this great ideas, and yeah. And Q is still kind of like that. There are always people who are trying to fix Q, but they've never, I don't understand it. To me, right, I loved physics because I wanted to understand how everything works. Why is the sky blue? My mother used to say that God had cursed her with a child with way too many questions that she could not answer. And then when I found Q, I was like, oh, I want to know why people do things. How do they think? And so to me, I'm like, oh, I want to learn everything there is about Q. How does this work? Like, what's the philosophy underneath here? And some people just go, oh, Q sorts, okay. Like, I don't get this. I think you should use cluster analysis instead of factor analysis. They never read the article that Stevenson wrote about why he picked factor analysis and not cluster analysis. Yeah, and there's a woman in University of Las Vegas at Reno working on her dissertation, and I actually helped her I gave her articles because her advisor wanted to use cluster analysis instead of factor analysis. I was like, I have the solution, it's in my collection. Where you can learn more, there's an International Society for the Study of Subjectivity. I4S is the International Q group. We have a website, www.qmethod.org, which we're going to update yet again. Zoom Q, which meets weekly, Operant Subjectivity, which is open access, journal, free, you can publish open access for free. And then Sean Banaszak's software, which is just thinking amazing and also free. My favorite four-letter word, also my favorite F word. And yeah, that's it. I'll keep it over here so you can see all the good things. Yay, and that's it. I have no idea what time it is. Yeah, that was pretty good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramlo. I think we're a little over the time, but I think we do have some minutes for maybe one or two quick questions. We have very diverse audience here with different backgrounds.
Jeremy, did you have a question?
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. So my question was, like, do you do this in like pre-college programs for like K through 12 students who haven't entered college and are considering certain majors, but might kind of back away from it?
I did a study. It was an NSF-funded study where part of it was about, it probably had to do with honeybees and pollinators, if I remember right, because I know the research area of Randy. But then it had an education component, and the education component was me. We went to a poor urban, in Akron, middle school where the year before students had gone on a little trip to our nature center, and they got to experience nature and understand about pollinators and, you know, what all, like a whole bunch of things, science-y. And then they came back and they wrote essays about it. And the next year, right, we were going to do it again, but we were going to do a Q study. So they gave me all of these narratives by these students the year before, and that's where I got my statements. And then I did a study on these urban middle schoolers about how they felt about science. And it was really interesting. I don't remember the details of that one. I think there were 3 viewpoints. But like one, I know one of the viewpoints was like really excited about science. They thought this was really fun. And then there was another group who didn't feel so much that way. And I don't remember what the third group was. I have to look again. But yeah, I have friends in Norway who use Q with preschoolers who are pre-reading, so they've had pictures. So they studied children of divorce in Norway who went to these preschools. So they just had pictures of, you know, a child sitting alone, a child playing with a friend, a child crying to his mom. So and they had these pre-readers sort these statements into a grid. It was like a FLAMEnet. And that's how they did their Q study, and the findings were really amazing. And it helped them design programs in the preschool to address how these children felt, understanding that different children were having very different experiences with the divorce process and, right, their new reality. Yeah, you.
If this is too hypothetical, then that's fine. So let's say, like one of these studies that you were talking about, you have 100 participants, and you leave it open to collect more data, and you process through 100 and come up with 4 factors, right? If you do this work to interpret those 4 factors, and then later consider your full 1,000, are you still going to have significance for those 4 factors you found?
They'll be the
And
same.
you can generate additional factors, and that's the benefit of the extra data?
If I had 100 and I had 4 factors, and then I had 200, I'd still have 4 factors. I mean, usually, so in Q, the reliability, so if you had a group of people and you had them sort a Q sample, and then a week later they sorted again, and 2 weeks later they sorted again, right? And 4 weeks later they sorted again, and then you correlated them. Each person's four Q sorts would be correlated at least by 80%. And it's usually the only thing that changes is the stuff in the middle. What they feel strongly about doesn't really change unless you have some kind of intervention. So if you have 5 people on a factor, the reliability of the factor score, so the composite Q sort, is somewhere around 98%. So having more than 5 people on a factor doesn't really change anything. So there are, I know some people who they're in Europe, they're in Amsterdam, and their funding agency through the European Union wants large numbers of people. So they've done Q studies where they've had like 1,000 participants, but they're really not gaining anything in doing that, because by the time they have 20 people on a factor, it's having 40 people on the factor is really not going to change things. It's going to be very, very consistent. So that's why, one of the reasons why we can do lower numbers of people, because we know about the consistency, and that's the kind of reliability that we talk about in Q, right? And when we talk about validity, we just say that, right, if we're doing a study about how people feel about love, right, as long as they can express their feelings with that Q sample, it's valid. So if I threw in a statement about love and tennis, right, that wouldn't be a valid statement, because that's a different kind of love, right? So it's in a lot of ways it's so different that I think that that's one of the reasons why it has a hard time having people understand it, and not having people, quote, always trying to fix it for various reasons.
I had the same question when I first came into Q with Sue. I was like, well, don't you need a bigger sample set? Isn't that going to change all your factors? And she's like, no, look at this. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Having that huge population of people
And
makes some differences. But
right, and sometimes we purposefully select sorters. So like for the academic freedom study, right, I would like to get people who are conservative MAGA voters, right, because their views are important to this study. Getting them to participate seems to be a problem. But so you would purposefully select people. But if I did it, and I did plenty, my poor students, they got extra credit on their final exam. They would do a Q study as a class about something I did, flipping the classroom and group work, whatever active learning things I had going on, or how their thoughts. I did not use the word epistemology for them, right? But how they thought about learning physics, like all of those kinds of things. Like then it's your classroom, so it's everybody or almost everybody in your classroom. But otherwise, right? Like the caregiving study. Well, there were 2 of them that I did with Carrie, and they were a group of people who were part of a program at a college that was brought on by somebody in human resources. They were trying to help people deal with their caregiving responsibilities for aging parents and relatives. And so we did the study with them. So it was all of them, and they took it in person all at once. And I ran around kind of like when I do group work in class, and and sometimes people have a really, because it's so self-reflective when you do the Q sort. Like in the one caregiving study, there was the HR guy who was driving the program, and then they're negatively correlated on that factor was this woman who wrote a lot, and she wrote all about how she was so busy taking care of her mom and making sure that she ate and went to the doctor, and she forgot to love her mother. And I cried, because I've cried a lot reading post-sort comments. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, is there a limit for the statements under each theme?
Not really, and it depends on the range of communication. So sometimes I've had maybe not the same number of statements in one category, because there's just not been that many broad set of comments in that area, and maybe something else. There's like teaching, there's always lots of comments about teaching and not as many about maybe scholarships and financial, like for the engineering retention study. So it depends. It's a great answer, isn't it? It depends. So you have to use your own thinking. I usually sort the items myself, and then like I'll pretend I'm like different types of people, like my perception, and then I'll sort it different ways, and just as a kind of a pilot test. I used to do more pilot testing than I do now, just because I've done so many that I feel a lot more confident that I've really captured things, and I have a good way of kind of testing out the Q sample ahead of time. But like when I had a couple of graduate students who one of them had a set of statements about technology use, like education technology use in engineering education. And then he went to different faculty and had them do a preliminary sort and asked them what was missing. And their responses were really interesting. One of the things somebody said was missing was drawing graphs, and he was like, you mean like in Excel, like a spreadsheet? They were like, no, I mean by hand, because to them that was education technology. So one of the things we found out was even what education technology was a point of divergence, that when you said technology used in your classroom, somebody said, well, how come an overhead's not on here? And we're like, really? An overhead? Is that technology? I mean, it is, but it's like technology from the 70s and 80s. But so we included those because that was important to some faculty. And if we were going to really capture their views about using technology in the classroom, we had to have some of those items in order to allow them to represent what they felt about using technology in the classroom and the types of technology they would use. That was an interesting study. Sure. It usually takes people about 20 minutes to do a Q sort. I mean, there's sometimes people are faster and sometimes people are slower. It just depends. There was Carrie and I were talking about, there was somebody at the recent Q conference, which was in Kent, Ohio, and somebody said that when they look online, if they feel like the sort time is too short, they eliminated those sorts.
I yelled at her. I'm like, I am such a fast sorter. Don't you ever get rid of my data.
Yeah, because some people know exactly how they feel, like they're really reflective people, so they go in and they're like, hell yeah, these are like me, these are not like me, and they're like all about it and locked in. And then there's people who are like, I've never thought about how I feel about learning physics. So you have my student David, who was among the last ones to hand in his Q sort, did it in class. And he wrote a whole thing about how he had this epiphany when he started sorting, that he was doing college all wrong. He was like a CD kind of student, and he realized he was doing it all wrong. He ended up on the factor that had all the kids that were getting A's in that class. And then I had him the next semester, and he was an A student. Because this process of sorting made him really reflect on what he was doing, and he was like, I mean, he wrote so much. My students so don't write. They wish they didn't have to take speech or English, right? They don't want to write anything. They just want to build stuff. Yeah. All right. Now we're really over time, aren't we?
All right, so if there are no more questions, let's thank Dr. Ramlo again.
Thank you.